I was born and raised in Nova Scotia, a little French-Canadian village on Cape Breton Island. Spent most of my childhood, like any other childhood, I had pretty dysfunctional background of some different things that happened in my life. But as an average kid, played sports, went to school, but knew at a very young age, probably right around grade 9, grade 10, that I was going to pursue a career in the military. Interestingly, I didn't have anybody that I grew up with that was military. I came again from a very small Acadian fishing village, 500-600 people. I didn't know a lot about veterans at that time, but something just drove me to want to pursue a career in the military. And I think for me it was a way to get out of where I was living and maybe go and see the world. So I had very preconceived ideas of what the military truly was. When I graduated from university, I'd already applied to the military. And again, I didn't know a lot about it, only what I watched in movies, what I saw on television. And from a very early on age, I was interested in military kind of history and stuff like that. But it wasn't until I joined the military that I truly saw the depth of what was honorable, in my opinion, was the fact that I was truly serving my country. It's important to understand that I was very young when I joined the military, only 18. And then what subsequently happened thereafter, I would have never imagined that in 9 years of a very short military career that I would have served overseas on 3 different occasions. And I have a very, very deep appreciation for the honorableness of serving my country. And that was probably the most impactful thing that happened to me very early on in my military career, was how proud I was and humble I was to have done that and served my country and made a difference. And I totally understood the background, of the ultimate sacrifices that people truly did pay. Again, I was very into military history, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, all the United Nations operations. So I had a pretty good understanding of that, but only because I read up on it and I didn't really truly understand it. So when I joined the military, that's when I really became I call it very patriotic. And loved what I did and serving my country, and did that very humbly. So very, very interesting. In 1991 is when I joined the Canadian Armed Forces, and just prior to my starting with recruit training, in January of 1991, we had the Gulf War. And I'll never forget that, being in December. Both my parents were like, they couldn't believe that I was going to go off and serve, especially with a full-on war happening in the world. That was extremely impactful for me. I'll never forget that as long as I live. Watching that unfold on television was, again, brought me to that level of I knew in my heart I was doing the right thing. I went through recruit training in Cornwallis, Nova Scotia in 1991. I joined as a crewman, which would have been the armored division. I finished my 6 months through basic training, and it's exactly what the movies like Full Metal Jacket. And it was everything I remember. I remember the first day getting my hair cut, sitting in with a group of 20, 30 men and women, all sitting in a hair, getting our hair buzzed. I'll never forget that. So I completed my training in Cornwallis, did 6 months of training, and then I moved on to Gagetown, New Brunswick, is where I did my battle school. It was truly there where I actually did my profession. We did our basic armored courses through Gagetown, and then subsequently I went on and was posted to Calgary, Alberta. I'd never ever left the Maritimes when I was a kid, and as a young 19-year-old, I ended up in Calgary, Alberta, and where I'm at today. And so during that time, I served with the Lord Strathcona's Horse, Royal Canadian. They were an armored regiment here, very significant history as far back as the Boer War. And again, I proudly served both in a tank squadron, and I also served in a Cougar squadron. Throughout my 9 years with the Strathconas, I served on 3 operational tours overseas. My first was in 1993. So a young 21-year-old left the country, and I served in Cambodia. A lot of people wondered why Cambodia, because obviously it was an aftermath of a war from the 60s and 70s. but we were the first ever United Nations group. There were over 30 nations that served over there, and it was the first time ever that they had a democratic election in their country. So I was very proud to have served there. Yes, the war was over, but you definitely saw the regime of Pol Pot and what he did to his people. And as a young 21-year-old to serve in a country, especially like Southeast Asia, was an honor and one I will never forget. And that established very early on in my career as a 2-year member. I grew up very quickly. I saw things in the world that I never thought I would ever see, but I grew up very, very fast. I got home in 1993. I got home from Cambodia, and I immediately went into training. I started my journey to Bosnia. I was only home for 5 months. I did all my training, and then I redeployed to Bosnia in 1994. Probably the most impactful thing that ever happened in my life. We arrived there, full-on Serbian offensive. The war was very chaotic, a lot of ethnic cleansing, saw a lot of things that I hope people never have to see. A lot of horror, a lot of kids, really impacted me to this day. Probably was the most impactful thing that ever happened in my life. I'm very proud to say I survived the 6 months. I was on the front line. I worked in a variety of areas on observation points to try to deconflict and stop people from fighting. And as we know in a war, that doesn't happen very easily. I saw a lot of death. I saw a lot of horror, and it just changed my complete outlook on life and on many aspects. This war was over religion, and I grew up in a Catholic French environment, and sadly it made me question the depth that I had in my faith, because I just saw so much there. I got back 1994, was very fortunate. I spent 2 years before I redeployed. I played a lot of hockey in the military, and I was fortunate enough to play with 1 Canadian Mechanized Brigade group. Met some fantastic individuals throughout my time in playing hockey from other units from all over Canada and Germany. And then I completed my last tour in 1997, where I went back to Bosnia-Herzegovina, but I went back in the aftermath of the war. I think what's most memorable for me is that during my time in 94 and 97, I made friends that I still keep in touch with today. One was an interpreter who I'll never forget. His name was Stu. We called him Stu, that wasn't his real name. And to this day, we still communicate. He's in Germany. He's a US ambassador for the US government over there. And just the amazing relationships that I made and still keep to this day. And just to hear their thanks for the things that we did to change their country at a time when here in Canada, I don't think we ever really acknowledge what truly happened in other parts of the world. And I think that was the hardest part of coming home, is that we weren't really acknowledged for the things that we did. 1996, they closed the base in Calgary before my last deployment. So we ended up moving to Edmonton, which was a fantastic thing because that's where I met my wife. And I finished my career after I got home in 1997. I terminated my career with the Canadian Armed Forces and I went on to university, where I graduated in 2002 with an education degree. From there, I wasn't happy about that, so I decided to carry on, and I joined the Calgary Police Service, where I just completed 18 years of service. 10 years of that service was done with our tactical team, and I attribute everything that I learned from the military to being capable of doing what I did for my 18 years with service. So Remembrance Day for me is extremely painful time. And it's painful because it's one day a year that most Canadians will get, and people from all over the world will get to remember the ultimate sacrifices made by people. But because I got to live that, and because I got to see that firsthand, it's a very emotional time for me. I find it very difficult at times to go to ceremonies because the poppy is very clear to me. It's a symbolic reference to sacrifice and honor. And humbly speaking, it's a very difficult thing to ask for that praise from the public. Knowing that you've done your time, you've served your country well, and I went on to serve my community as well. And there's without a doubt, looking back at my history and, having served in the military and gone on to university and then having served honorably with the Calgary Police Service, I can tell you, and I'm very comfortable telling you, that I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2016. The wheels fell off the bus because I was been well put together for many years of my life. I was high functioning and I knew that, but I was torn apart inside and in my head. And it was for the things that I saw both on the military side and also on the police side. I saw things that I hope people will never have to experience ever. The poppy is extremely important to me for my kids, that they understand that we will never forget the sacrifices made, not just by their own dad, but by people that have paved the way for this country. My girls they know I'm very passionate about it. They know it's a very difficult time for me. My wife does as well. I'm very fortunate. I've been married 20 years to one person. I consider that a goal because having been through what I've been through and experienced, having the support of my family behind me has been instrumental in the person I've become today. But Remembrance Day is, again, a solemn time that we all come together to remember, but I live that every day in my life. Throughout my entire military career and even today, some of the closest bonds I've ever shared were with members from my military days. Lots that I don't keep in touch with and very few that I do. But the camaraderie that we share is extremely different than anybody's stories. When you serve with people and you see the things that we've seen, they become your family. They become the glue that holds it together. I vividly remember throughout my time as a patrol officer here in Calgary and dealing with veterans that were homeless, and my heart would break for them because the minute they would see my medals on my uniform, it was an instant bond. And I can't tell you how many of these members are homeless veterans that are out there that have mental health issues. And I'm telling you, I'm one of them. It took me a long time to understand that and be real true myself. But if there's anything I could tell young kids today and their families, is that, again, we can never forget the sacrifices that men and women have done for us throughout our history. We can never forget what's currently ongoing today with our forces that are still serving. But remember that when these men and women come home from no matter where we're fighting, no matter what we're fighting for freedom of this country, that they come home, a lot of people are broken. And it's honorable to think that most people will come forward, but I can tell you from my personal experience, it's the hardest thing to do. So the kids that are out there, my kids specifically, is I just want them to remember and cherish those memories and just take time out of their ordinary lives to remember that why Canada is such a great country to live in. We're so fortunate.